webheads, and welcome in. My name is Dominic, and today you're tuning in to the Comic Book Report, where we review comic books and graphic novels so you can get an idea of what to read. And today we are celebrating all things Spider-Man with another comic book run comparison video. Today we'll do a quick overview of the runs by Stan Lee, J. Michael Straczynski, and Brian Michael Bendis. I plan to showcase their runs across the omnibus format and compare their runs where appropriate. I did do a video like this comparing some modern Batman runs about a year ago, and more recently I just released a Daredevil run comparison video as well. So if you've enjoyed this format, let me know, and I hope you enjoy what we have today talking Spider-Man. Before we jump into our runs though, let's go ahead and shout out the channel's sponsor, Panelbound Comics. If you're interested in picking up your own comic book collected editions, perhaps some Spider-Man comics, I'd always encourage you to check out their website. You can find a link to it in the video's description, and if you see anything on the site you like, you can actually use my discount code at checkout, TheComicBookReport, to save $2 off of your order. Please note if you use my affiliate link or code to make a purchase, I will earn a small commission, but it's a fantastic way to support this channel. Thank you so much for considering. Now let's get started with today's Spider-Man run comparison. Before we jump into the runs, I do want to do a brief spoiler warning. I will be talking about these runs to varying degree of details, and I will be talking about plot points. You've been advised. Okay, kicking off our video today, we're going to be looking at some omnibuses from the Stan Lee era of The Amazing Spider-Man. And to my knowledge, his entire run basically is collected across the first 4 volumes of The Amazing Spider-Man omnibuses, and while I have all 4 volumes, for today's video, I'm just going to be flipping through the first 2. I think with those 2, I'll give you an idea of why I think Stan Lee's run is so great, and in some ways unparalleled. First off, obviously, he kicks off The Amazing Spider-Man with Steve Ditko. They created the character, this foundational flagship character for the entire publisher, who is so embedded in the cultural zeitgeist just worldwide. Obviously, you have to give your flowers to this run, but I think more than just creating this character, this run still holds up against the test of time as one of the best in the character's history, and that is really saying something in my book. Steve Ditko has such human and realized characters. Their expressions don't feel lofty or too polished. They feel just real. There's something animated or cartoony about them, sure, but there's a lot of real expressions in the faces. The character models don't feel overinflated. They feel true to life. And I think that there's so much character in what Ditko instills in them in these early issues, and it really does set the tone for Spider-Man moving forward. And while Ditko won't be the artist for the entire run by Stan Lee, he really does pave the way, especially in the beginnings. Now, Stan Lee really did have something new here in the world of contemporary comics of the time. Obviously, the origins of The Amazing Spider-Man kind of kickstarted really at the beginning of that silver age of comics in my mind, and I love this character. I think what's something that made this character, Peter Parker, Spider-Man, so unique was that you focused on a teenager as the focal point main character for the book. He's not relegated as a sidekick like in the case of Robin for Batman. No, he's holding his own. And also, instead of being a character who has things more or less put together to be a superhero, this is someone who's very flawed and in some ways insecure, that his life feels like it's always on the border of falling apart or in shambles, and yet he still has to kind of soldier on. To have a character like this at this time in comics was almost unheard of, especially in mainstream superhero comics, and I think right from the jump it set Peter Parker, Spider-Man aside as something really unique. Something else about this run that I really love and I just think is outstanding is that most of Spider-Man's main rogues gallery of villains are all introduced within the first couple years on this book. I'm talking characters like Dr. Octopus, Green Goblin, the Rhino, Electro, Kraven the Hunter, Mysterio, Vulture, and more and more and more. In fact, of Spider-Man's main villains that are still utilized a ton today, I think Venom and Carnage, like the symbiote characters, are some some of the biggest that weren't introduced all the way back then. Obviously, there are some other modern ones that are quite good as well, but I think a lot of your main Spider-Man mainstays, they all show up in these first handful of issues. The Lizard, Scorpion, again, the list goes on, and we see them all across this run. Similarly, we have the introduction of a lot of the kind of supporting cast of characters for Spider-Man 2. Characters like Gwen Stacy, Mary Jane Watson, Flash Thompson, of course Aunt May, and the dearly departed Uncle Ben Parker. We also have J. Jonah Jameson from the Daily Bugle, and some of these other characters. Again, they're all introduced pretty early on. Harry Osborn, of course. Again, all of these mainstays right here baked into the kind of initial few issues. I love that so much of the formula, so much that made and still makes Spider-Man so great, is all packed into these early issues. The fact that Stan Lee has created these characters that withstood the test of time, even as some of them have grown and evolved over time, but you still have so much of the same DNA, I just think is really breathtaking. And it's a feat that isn't paralleled in a lot of other comics around this time, at least in my mind. As Stan Lee's run evolves, we do see a lot of these artists come in and out. We see the character models for Spider-Man get further refined. The characterizations also tend to deepen and grow, and I really like it all. I think something that makes a Spider-Man run really memorable is when we get to see the human conflicts and sides of the struggle in the person of Peter Parker and some of his just main core relationships. And that's something as well you feel baked in right from the beginning. Of course, we have a lot of larger-than-life superhero hijinks, of course. This is the colorful Silver Age after all, but it's really how we get to see him navigate his relationships with characters like his guardian Aunt May, his peer group as it kind of tries to either reject him or embrace him at different stages, and then of course his interplay with all of those just, again, cavalcade of villains. I really just think that this is such a standout run. It does hold up against the test of time. If you've never read Silver Age comics, these books from the 50s, 60s, and so on, a lot of the language can be a little dated. I think that there's a lot more exposition and text heavy versus the art, which is so prominent in a lot of modern comics. But it's still very good. I think it's absolutely readable, and I consider it on the short list of some of the best of the Silver Age comics that can still be read today. If you're talking The Amazing Spider-Man, if you're talking about his tenure, his history, and some of the very best of his runs, I think to this day, Stan Lee's is easily in that short list, and I stand by it. Don't miss out on the original run on Amazing Spider-Man. Next up for our comic book run comparison for Spider-Man, we're going to be talking about The Amazing Spider-Man by J. Michael Straczynski. We have an artist here, John Romita Jr., that does a lot of collaboration with Straczynski during this era. We have other artists kind of trickle in through the back half of the run as well. J. Michael Straczynski's run is broken up across these two oversized hardcover omnibus editions. There were also smaller paperbacks, or I think 5 Ultimate collections that collected this entire run as well. But these omnibuses are a real treat. They do come in and out of print. I do believe they might be out of print at this time, but stay tuned. You never know when Marvel's going to surprise us with a reprint. But going over here, what makes The Amazing Spider-Man by Straczynski such a memorable and great run? I should say, first of all, it's not without its controversy. I think that a lot of people see maybe one or two kind of rough storylines that were driven in many cases by editorial decisions, and they decide to paint with a broad brush over this run. But I think to do that is really to miss out on what makes this run amazing. In fact, in my mind, it is probably the best modern Spider-Man run, period, full stop. There are so many memorable, engaging stories, and I think that something Straczynski gets, and the way that Stan Lee got, is that it's the supporting cast and the relatable human aspects of Spider-Man that make him so relatable. And we have that in spades here in Straczynski's run. We have the reappearance of the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. Across this run, we have so many human moments for Peter Parker and, his relationship with Aunt May and Mary Jane Watson and some of his other supporting cast. We also have him taking up a career as a teacher. So we see him as a mentor and kind of guiding light for a lot of his students. We see little moments he has with some of his students, trying to make a difference in their lives. And also as Spider-Man, we see him interacting with the people of New York, and I really liked that approach. It felt like it grounded this character so much. And that's not to say we didn't have a a ton of high-flying hijinks with Spider-Man facing off against some of his fiendish foes, because we certainly did. But it's these human moments that really sell the run for Straczynski for me. I also really like that it tried to add more things to the mythos, even if I didn't agree or love all the direction there. Like they introduced early on this character of Ezekiel that tried to really add layers to the origin story, saying the spider chose to bite him and that he's kind of a representative of this animal spirit, I guess. I don't know. It just adds a lot of interesting layers. We do get to see new villains like Morlun, who of course becomes more significant in the history of Spider-Man with all the Spider-Verse stuff later on. This run, as we crest the halfway point into the back half, we also get the Civil War era, which for Spider-Man is a huge deal. I don't want to spoil too much on Civil War in case you haven't read Marvel's Civil War event, but Spider-Man is a huge and key figure in that event, and we get to see how that affects him in this omnibus. Overall, this run is just fantastic. Like I said, the more human character moments really shine here. We do get to see a lot of great action, though, a lot of great plot lines. I think, again, there are one or two storylines throughout this run that I'm not a big fan of. One that kind of tries to mar the legacy of Gwen Stacy. I think it's called Sins Past or Sins Remembered or something like that. I really didn't like that. It suggests that Gwen Stacy cheated on Peter with Norman Osborn, which, yeah, I mean, this is rough for a ton of reasons. And then, of course, the Spider-Man One More Day, which is how this run culminates, and it kind of bridges into that Brand New Day era. That's the, of course, storyline that annuls and gets rid of the marriage he has with Mary Jane and a lot of the history there. Again, a big swing there that a lot of fans don't like, of course. I've heard that it's editorially driven. I've heard rationale for it. I'm not a fan of that choice, but I do think that story is still really well written. The art is gorgeous, and I think overall this run is just a triumph. I've said it before, I'll say it again, but I do think it's the human elements that make this run so successful for me. I think that JMS really understands Peter Parker. He understands why fans like him. He adds enough of his own to the plate, too, that you still feel like you're getting fresh, modern stories, while also, again, paying off why this character is so beloved. I love the agency he gives to characters like Mary Jane Watson and Aunt May in particular as well. They both have to navigate a ton of ups and downs in their own lives and in their relationships with Peter Parker, and I love that. I love that they are full, well-rounded, developed supporting characters, and that's just in addition he does with Spider-Man himself and all his villains and all, again, the bigger, larger scale storytelling. I also like that we have a change in vocation for Peter Parker. Like I said, he starts teaching, and I think that this really adds a new layer. Because of that, I also think that this is such a great place for new readers to start. If you're looking for a relatively modern Spider-Man run, you know, this is early 2000s-ish, this is a really great place to start. Of course, there's stuff that happened before, but it still feels like a good reset for new readers. Also, you just get such a tremendous sequence of arcs and conflicts and everything throughout this run that it's a real treat from end to end. The art we have in the early run by John Romita Jr. as well, I think is some of his best. I love what he does in the Spider-Man suit with the character. I love how he draws the villains, and overall the sense of momentum and action I think is really solid. And then a lot of the artists we onboard for the back half of the run I think are also really striking. I think a lot of those artists are a little more realism heavy and kind of have a bit more polish to them. But again, it's still a really fun vision of Spider-Man, his supporting cast of characters, his rogues gallery of villains, and again, this run just kind of has a little bit of it all. I think that overall this run is really well regarded and with good reason, but for those of you that have maybe always tuned out or tuned off to this run because of how it ends, I think you owe yourself the chance to read it and make your own decisions, because I think it's still a great run. And even the stories that I disagree with the most, I still think they are well written, but perhaps that's just my personal opinion. At any rate, for your consideration, J. Michael Straczynski's Amazing Spider-Man. Okay, and now as we transition to the back half of today's video, I do want to talk about our last writer for Spider-Man, and that is Brian Michael Bendis. However, to do that, I'm going to break his run into two parts. I'm going to talk about his run on Ultimate Spider-Man that followed Peter Parker Spider-Man, and then to round out this video, I'm going to share his run on Ultimate Spider-Man following Miles Morales. There's a total of, I think, 8 omnibuses, give or take, for all of these runs, but for the course of today's video, I'm going to look at the first 2 omnibuses for Ultimate Spider-Man following Peter, and then the first 2 omnibuses following Miles. Okay, and with that said, let's go ahead and start talking about it. As we go into this first Ultimate Spider-Man omnibus, I'll say that this was one of my earliest incarnations of Spider-Man. I think I read a lot of the Stan Lee run, and then it was this for me. I also read this at a still kind of formative time in my life. This is another one that came out kind of early 2000s era, but this is set in a different Marvel universe. This is not in their mainstream canon universe of 616. This is in the Marvel Ultimate Universe, which I can't remember the numerics for it, but I think it has a 616 and a 0 in some capacity. But anyway, this was at the beginning of a new era for Marvel Comics. This was set in a side universe where you weren't bogged down by decades of continuity and character dynamics. You can start fresh with an issue 1, and you got new modernizations of these characters and properties. You had runs like this, Ultimate Spider-Man, you had the Ultimates, which was their Avengers title, Ultimate Fantastic Four, Ultimate X-Men, and eventually we had more kind of popping up in that world. But it's the run here by Bendis that really just struck a chord with me. I love this series. He teams up with longtime Spider-Man illustrator Mark Bagley for I think over 100 issues, and then the back half of the Bendis Peter Parker stuff, I think we had artists like Stuart Immonen and a couple others. All great artists, but really this run by Bendis and Bagley, it really just sucked me in. It is a modern refreshing for the Spider-Man mythos. You don't need to know anything about Spider-Man because it gives you a brand new origin, brand new dynamics, brand new character introductions. Everything, as you guessed, is brand new. And while some of these issues might feel dated now as they came out in the early 2000s, I still think it is a worthy refreshing of the mythos. Instead of having a couple pages to describe the whole origin of Spider-Man, it's stretched out across 6 issues. In that, we get so many more characters and development and depth. We get to know who Uncle Ben is before he is unfortunately murdered. We get to see all of that in greater detail. We once again have a high school age Peter Parker bitten by a radioactive or kind of experimental spider. He gains the powers of Spider-Man. He contends with his own selfishness and vanity and ultimately learns the lesson about great power and great responsibility after the death of his uncle. We also have the emergence of Green Goblin, Norman Osborn, as a key maker of the kind of radiated spider. We have him transforming himself into this grotesque, actual monstrous goblin, and that becomes the series' main antagonist, and we get to see all of that birthed in the origin in those first 6 issues. From that point, we just bounce around getting to know more of Spider-Man's world. We get to see some classmates, some new, some familiar in some capacity. We get to see his burgeoning relationship with Mary Jane Watson, who is not a self-assured model here, but more of another science kind of nerdy girl who is pretty and likable, but still trying to figure out who she is and what she stands for. We get to see their relationship blossom and pivot here and there. Definitely a noteworthy character. We get to see his relationship with Aunt May, and of course we're introduced to a slew of notable villains. In fact, most of Spider-Man's rogues gallery is shown in the Ultimate Spider-Man universe, and even within these first couple arcs. What I love about Ultimate Spider-Man is that it gets to play by its own rules to an extent. It's not buried or having to consider so many other runs going on in tandem and years of continuity. It can tell fresh stories. We do have, again, the reappearance of a lot of familiar characters, and in some cases storylines like the Clone Saga or Birth of Venom or Death of Gwen Stacy, but again, they're refreshed and mixed up in ways that are in many ways unpredictable, and I love that. I think what's something that Stan Lee and JMS did in Spider-Man that I also see here with Bendis is their attention to what makes Peter Parker great. He's so likable, he's affable, he does have some quirks and flaws, he's sometimes short-tempered, he's down on his luck often, and he's kind of a victim of circumstance. We see all of that displayed here in Ultimate Spider-Man. Like Stan Lee, though, this brings him back to his early high school roots. We once again have a high schooler trying to grapple with being a superhero, and I think that this is a really good choice because it lets us get back in on the ground floor with the character, and we get to see him grow and evolve throughout this run. Like the other runs I've mentioned as well, this also has a great attention to characterization. I think maybe more so even like what JMS was doing. We get to go deeper with these characters. We get to see how all their motivations line up. I think that Bendis' dialogue is largely rock solid. I stand by it. I'm a huge Bendis fan, and I think that this is amongst his great runs. I have this and Daredevil probably at the tippy top. But yeah, a really fantastic series. I love the art from Bagley, returning from all his great work across like 90s Spider-Man. I love that they onboarded him, and for so long here in the Ultimate Spider-Man. While this run might not be for everyone, I think it's certainly for most, and if you're a Spider-Man fan and you've yet to read the Ultimate Spider-Man run by Brian Michael Bendis, I highly recommend it. The entire run is collected across 4 omnibus editions, and then either the Death of the Amazing Spider-Man or the upcoming Ultimate Spider-Man Omnibus Volume 5. And of course, these are not including the 2 volumes Bendis did for Miles Morales, but more on that in a minute. And hey, if you're liking this video and you've yet to subscribe to the channel, I just want to invite you to do so. I'm always doing comic book list videos, reviews, unboxings, and depending on how you like this, maybe more comic book run comparisons. Anyway, thank you for considering. Now let's go ahead and go to the next run. Okay, and rounding out our video today, we're going to be talking about Brian Michael Bendis' run on Miles Morales' Ultimate Spider-Man. Taking place after the death of Ultimate Spider-Man, this is really the new chapters of Spider-Man. Someone else takes up the mantle, and yes, it is this young boy, Miles Morales, who, like Peter Parker, is also quite young. In fact, he's even younger than Peter Parker was when he gets his abilities. And how does he get abilities? Well, his uncle, who is the Prowler in the Ultimate Universe, steals things from Oscorp, and while he's there, an irradiated spider or experimented on spider basically gets into his things, and when Miles visits his uncle, he is bitten, he foams at the mouth, and then he develops spider powers. Just like his predecessor, he has all those same abilities, but with a couple new wrinkles, as this spider was experimented on differently. In addition to the normal slew of Spider-Man powers, we also have a Venom Shock and a Camouflage ability where he becomes near invisible with his surroundings. Really like this wrinkle. I think the new power dynamics even add to a new sense of conflict and certainly new situations. Also, of course, being a new character and not just Peter Parker, this is also probably the biggest, boldest relaunch of a mainstream Spider-Man title in a long time, if ever. I really love the characters we have introduced. Like Peter Parker before him, we have a rich just supply of supporting characters like his parents, his best friend at school, Genki, and of course some notable villains. What's also interesting about Miles Morales' Ultimate Spider-Man is that it serves not only as a relaunch to a Spider-Man book and a new origin and a new character, but it also serves as an epilogue to the previous Ultimate Spider-Man title following Peter Parker. Because of that, even though Peter Parker is dead, we have some of his surviving family, friends, loved ones, and villains. So we have appearances by Mary Jane Watson, Gwen Stacy, Aunt May, and so many more who interact with Miles as he takes up this new mantle and legacy, and we get to see that interplay, and that's just truly a unique dynamic. We even have key moments with the Ultimate Universe's Spider-Woman character. I really like those issues and the interplay there. Like Bendis' Ultimate Spider-Man previously, and even like Stan Lee's Spider-Man, we have an origin where he has to confront, with great power does there come great responsibility. But unlike Peter, we don't have the death of his uncle here. We actually have the death of Spider-Man himself as the kickstarting, kind of inciting incident that makes him think that he needs to be more responsible with these gifts he has. He's actually on scene when Spider-Man dies, and he already has his powers. And he realizes that just like this Peter is quite young and he's doing so much with what he's been given, he needs to do the same. We also have this Miles being a bit more unsure than Peter ever was. He deals with things like fear in ways that Peter never did. He has a completely different upbringing and dynamic with his loved ones, and that just really informs who this character is. He's also trying to establish himself in the wake of a previous Spider-Man, and I just really love all of that. It adds so many layers to this character. We also have, again, some returning characters. We have some new villains show up, and this run is really interesting in that it's a two-parter, but one is before Marvel's Secret Wars, and one takes place after. And why that's important is that Miles goes from the Ultimate Universe into the mainstream 616 Marvel Universe, and that happens around the halfway point into Bendis' run here. I really like that, and that event actually shifts the dynamics and history of the characters. It brings his mom back to life, who died in the original Ultimate Spider-Man universe, same with his uncle Aaron, and it just really resets it all over again. It probably goes without saying, but this run of course resembles most the Ultimate Spider-Man run by Bendis that I just spoke about, but it also in many ways reminds me of the original run by Stan Lee. We once again have an origin, and like the Stan Lee stuff, this is a new character. We're establishing new norms, and I loved it. I think this is debatably the biggest Spider-Man origin or relaunch since what Stan Lee and Steve Ditko did all the way back in the 60s. I really love the character of Miles Morales in his own right. I think he stands alone, but of course people are always going to compare him to Peter Parker. I think today we also have the added comparison to his on-screen counterpart in the Spider-Verse movies. And while this Miles is supposed to be that same character, there are a lot of discrepancies or differences there. I think that this Spider-Man takes a little bit longer to get to a kind of in-depth characterization. He feels very young early on in this run, and while it's still really great, I think that he does mature and grow as a character and hero logically throughout. So if you're going from the Spider-Verse movies and jump right to this and feel like this feels like a different character, that's okay. There's still a lot of similar threads, and this character is still really great in the comic book incarnation in his own right. Like Peter and all of these other runs, I think Miles really deals with a lot of insecurity and doubt and dealing with his own just tragedies in his life, like so many, and I think that that makes him so very human, and I think that exploring the humanity of the central character, who also happens to be Spider-Man, is really what makes these runs shine in general. I've seen shades of it in all the runs, but especially in the modern Spider-Man runs I've explored today, like JMS and the earlier Bendis era, I think that these rich characterizations and diving deep into the world of these characters and their relationships are really what make these runs pop so very much upon reading. While decidedly different, Miles is absolutely Spider-Man, and this run is amongst my favorite in the Spider-Man canon. If you haven't read Bendis' Ultimate Spider-Man with Miles Morales, I do recommend it. And with that, we can start bringing this video to a close. I hope you've enjoyed as I've compared the comic book runs of Spider-Man from Stan Lee, J. Michael Straczynski, and of course Brian Michael Bendis. I had a ton of fun exploring the histories of this character as he was relaunched, launched initially, and just had decisively different chapters within his life. I tried to blend some older runs and some more contemporary choices here for what I hope is a fun experience for all of you. I would love to hear in the comments, have you read any of these runs on Spider-Man? What are your favorites? Do you agree with my analysis or not? And what Spider-Man runs would you love to see in a video like this moving forward? Also, did you like this format? Did you like the comic book run comparison idea? And what characters would you love to see get a similar treatment moving forward on my channel? I would love to hear your feedback. Again, this kind of video is still largely experimental to me, so I would love to have your feedback. Thank you so much for watching. I love this character, and it was so much fun just taking a step back into this world and exploring what are my personal favorite runs on Spider-Man. Thank you for taking this journey along with me today, and until next time, this has been the Comic Book Report. Please don't forget to give this video a like, those comments we talked about, and maybe share it with a friend. Every little bit helps, and thank you so much. Bye.